Okay, recording in progress. Welcome. Today we are going to provide a training on the public safety assessment, which we have recently implemented in Thurston County. My name is Carrie Hennon. I'm the Director of Thurston County Pretrial Services, and I'm joined today by...
Hi, I'm Nicole Carbone. I am the Supervisor of the Pretrial Services Department.
Right, thanks. So today we'll provide a little bit of background on the public safety assessment, as well as pretrial assessment tools in general, provide a more detailed overview of the PSA, our release conditions matrix, give an example of how the PSA scores individual cases, and tell you a bit about the PSA implementation in Thurston County. By way of background, Thurston County is a research action site for the Advancing Pretrial Policy and Research Project that has been the case since 2019. APPR is an overall look at our pretrial justice system with many different elements. Implementation of the public safety assessment is just one element of that work, and the overall APPR project is overseen by an advisory committee. The advisory committee includes many different offices and departments throughout our Thurston County criminal legal system, as well as local law enforcement, state partners, behavioral health partners, etc. Again, as kind of a high-level overview, we recently implemented the public safety assessment at the beginning of October 2023. We are completing the public safety assessment prior to the preliminary appearance in order to provide consistent, standardized information to judicial officers and attorneys at that preliminary appearance hearing. The decision about whether to release or detain an individual and the specific conditions of release is still made by a judicial officer. If the judicial officer orders someone to be released to the community pre-trial and orders pretrial services to supervise that case, the scores on the public safety assessment translate into the supervision level based on a release conditions matrix, which we will also provide an overview of today. And a big part of our implementation of the public safety assessment is quality assurance and ongoing review of data. In general, pretrial assessment tools really are just used to predict. We would like to bring the best evidence and data to understand who is likely to succeed and who is likely not to succeed on pretrial release. We can then use that information to intervene, to judges may impose specific conditions to try to intervene before some sort of pretrial failure occurs. In general, pretrial tools use information about people's past to predict the future. So information from the past might include previous cases that may be pending, previous failures to appear, past convictions and the types of convictions, past sentences, and pretrial tools, and there are many different tools, might include other information such as the age of the individual or the charges of the current allegation. And again, pretrial assessments are one piece of information that inform pretrial decisions. So pretrial assessment tools, we're trying to provide information on kind of two big questions: risk of what and how much risk. So in this case, we're looking at risk of failure to appear and risk of new criminal arrest during the pretrial period. And we also want to, again, provide the best information on how much risk. There are many different types of pretrial assessment tools. The public safety assessment is just one of them. There has been a lot of discussion nationally and in the community about bias, racial bias, etc. in pretrial assessment. The public safety assessment has been validated, and we'll speak a little bit more about the results and data underlying that validation, and did not show any disparate predictions, disparate outcomes across racial and ethnic groups. But to be clear, pretrial assessment tools, because they use information about the past to predict the future, and because we know there's significant evidence of bias in our criminal legal system, that bias can be reflected in these pretrial assessment tools. When we switch to use a very specific, transparent pretrial assessment tool like the public safety assessment, it actually does have some advantages with respect to bias compared to a more subjective system, in that it is more consistent, more transparent, and we will be able to have better data to kind of understand whether we see bias in our system, the types of bias, etc.
So next we're going to look specifically, oh, thank you. So next we're going to look specifically at the public safety assessment and provide an overview of it. So the public safety assessment was developed by Arnold Ventures in 2013, and it is an actuarial assessment that predicts failure to appear in court during the pretrial phase, new criminal arrests while on pretrial release, as well as new violent criminal arrests while on pretrial release. So Arnold Ventures sought to develop a fair, user-friendly assessment that would use only administrative data to provide research-based information to assist in making more informed pretrial release decisions. So this is a tool, I think, as Carrie said, it is a tool among a variety of other strategies that can lead to improved pretrial outcomes. So specifically, Arnold Ventures sought to develop a tool that would predict the likelihood of failure to appear in new criminal arrests separately. A lot of the other pretrial risk assessment tools available do not predict these outcomes separately. They are predicted together. They also wanted to predict the likelihood of a new violent criminal arrest. They wanted the factors to not be dependent on interviews, so focused on administrative data only. They were focused on improving overall predictive accuracy, and they wanted the tool to be applicable anywhere in the United States, as well as for it to be available without a cost. So the PSA is a tool that can help advance more fair and effective pretrial justice when implemented thoroughly and comprehensively in a local jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So the PSA was developed. Oh, thank you. The PSA was developed on 750,000 cases and tested on another 500 cases from around the country. And the 9 PSA factors displayed on the screen were found to be the most predictive of the 3 pretrial outcomes. So of note, none of the PSA factors listed here are related to community ties or stability. All of these factors can be scored from administrative databases. So we're looking at what was their age at current arrest? Do they have a current violent offense? And is that current violent offense, and are they 20 years old or younger? Do they have a pending charge at time of the arrest? Do they have any prior misdemeanor convictions and any prior felony convictions? Do they have any prior violent convictions? Factor 7, do they have any prior failure to appear in the past 2 years? Factor 8, do they have any prior failure to appear older than 2 years? And lastly, do they have any prior sentence to incarceration? So related to these factors being based upon administrative databases and not requiring an interview, that does not mean that other factors that are related to community ties are not relevant, but rather what it means is that the research showed that these 9 factors were the most predictive, and the information obtained from an interview did not improve the PSA's predictive nature. So again, this research conducted to develop the PSA isolated the most predictive factors in the data set, which are the 9 displayed. So next, what we can see here is the factors, in addition to our 3 pretrial outcomes being failure to appear, new criminal arrest, and new violent criminal arrest. So what we can see on this chart on the screen is that not all the factors are used to predict each outcome. So for example, if we're looking at what factors impact the failure to appear score, we can see whatever has a check mark is the factors that play into that outcome. So looking at FTA, factor 3, a pending charge, 5A, whether or not they have any type of conviction, it doesn't matter if it's a misdemeanor or felony. And then looking at factor 7 and 8, whether or not they have any FTAs in the last 2 years and any FTAs older than 2 years. So those are the 4 factors that impact the FTA outcome. Whereas if we continue to move across, if we're looking at the new criminal arrest, factor 1, their age at current arrest, factor 3, pending, factor 4 and 5, prior misdemeanor or felony conviction, factor 6 and 7, and 9 all play into a new criminal arrest. The other thing I just want to point out here is, again, some factors are also more predictive than others. So for example, factor 3, whether someone has a pending charge at time of arrest, that is the most predictive factor for all 3 of these outcomes. So you can see the boxes checked for both FTA, NCA, and NVCA. Next slide, please. Awesome. So when we're looking at PSA scores, specifically the factor weights and how the scores are compiled, each pretrial outcome is assigned points according to the strength of the relationship between the factor and the specific pretrial outcome. So different points are assigned to different factors because the research showed that the factors are not equally strong predictors. So the PSA calculates a raw score for each outcome based on these points. So the raw score for failure to appear in new criminal arrest is then converted into a scaled score of 1 to 6. So the lower the score, it indicates a greater likelihood of pretrial success. So for example, a 1 versus someone who scores a 6 is indicating that they are least likely to succeed during the pretrial process. And then the raw score of the new violent criminal arrest is converted to a scaled score, and then it is converted again to the presence or absence of a flag. And the flag indicates an elevated likelihood of a new violent criminal arrest. Next slide, please. So here on the screen, we can see the likelihood of success for these 2 outcomes, looking at appearance rate and new criminal arrest rate. And here, because Thurston County is a research action site through APPR, we had the exciting opportunity to have a local validation done. So I think, as Carrie discussed, there was a national validation of the PSA, and it has been validated nationally, so that way it can be utilized amongst the country in a variety of different jurisdictions. But we also had the opportunity to use our own local data in Thurston County, and the PSA was validated based upon that data. So the numbers that are on this screen are not the national numbers, they are our local Thurston County PSA validation. And so if we're looking at the appearance rate, if an individual has an FTA score of a 1, that means that they are 90% likely to appear at court, versus if an individual has an FTA score of a 4, that means that they are 71% likely to appear at court. And the same logic follows with the new criminal arrest rates scaled score here. An individual with a 1 means that they are 94% likely to remain arrest-free while in the pretrial process, whereas an individual with a scaled score of a 6, that means that they are 70% likely to remain arrest-free during that pretrial phase. And one thing I'd just like to point out here is in looking at the scaled score of 1 through 6 and how likely someone is to succeed is one thing you'll notice is neither of these scores are below 50%. And so even if someone has the highest score, they are more likely to succeed than to not succeed, especially if we can provide individualized conditions and community referrals to help support them through this period. Next slide, please. And then here is the validation scores for our new violent criminal arrest rate. So if someone has a flag of yes, what this means is that they are 91% likely to remain arrest-free from a violent criminal arrest. And if someone does not have the flag, if they are no, that means they are 96% likely to not get a new violent criminal arrest while they are released during the pretrial phase. Next slide. So related to the public safety assessment and specifically domestic violence or IPV cases, we just wanted to point out that we acknowledge that the public safety assessment is not intended to predict lethality, and it does not predict lethality. Domestic violence cases and IPV cases were used in both the national and the local validations of the PSA. And the PSA has been found to be valid in predicting the pretrial outcomes, again, focusing on court appearance and new criminal arrest, despite what type of case it is. So again, this included all types of cases, including both DV and IPV. Again, the PSA is not designed to predict lethality, and we acknowledge that. And many local law enforcement agencies in Thurston County do use a supplemental report or lethality checklist, and this information may be available to the prosecuting attorney's office, and that is information that could be provided during a preliminary appearance to inform judicial officers' decisions. And we have had some local work groups on this specific topic, and that work group will be reconvening or has reconvened to consider possible DV specific risk assessment tools that could be supplemented or used in combination with the PSA in these types of cases.
Thank you. Okay, so as we discussed, the public safety assessment provides PSA scores related to court appearance, new criminal arrest, and new violent criminal arrest, and those scores translate into our release conditions matrix. So we use the PSA to assess people, and then if the judicial officer orders release during that pretrial period, we use the release conditions matrix to tailor the supervision level based on the level of risk. So our local release conditions matrix was developed by a work group of all our local criminal justice system stakeholders, so including judicial officers, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, law enforcement, pretrial services staff. And it matches the PSA scores to the level of pretrial supervision. And the sort of underlying premise is that we as pretrial services will focus our resources on individuals who need the most support, and will provide sort of a lighter touch of supervision to individuals who are the most likely to succeed. This is all very consistent with the principle that individuals should be released with the least restrictive conditions needed to reasonably assure court appearance, behavior. And again, it really is about tailoring that level of supervision to the likelihood of pretrial success. So individuals who have the lowest scores will have very minimal conditions, and people with higher scores will receive more support, more check-ins, etc., with a goal of supporting their success during the pretrial period with respect to court appearance and law-abiding behavior. This is a visual of our release conditions matrix. As you can see, it is in a matrix form, and it draws from those scaled scores related to failure to appear and new criminal arrest that come from the public safety assessment. So the way this table reads is the left-hand column shows the failure to appear scaled score, and the row across the top shows the new criminal arrest scaled score. And where those scores match provides a level from 1 to 4, and that's the level of supervision that will be assigned to someone by pretrial services if they are released to the community and ordered to pretrial services supervision. So for example, if an individual scores a 3 for failure to appear and scores a 4 for new criminal arrest, we would go down the failure to appear column to the row marked 3, we would go across the new criminal arrest to the column marked 4, and we would see that those meet at the 2, and they would be assigned a 2 for supervision. This next table shows us the what those supervision levels entail. So this shows each of those a column for each of those supervision levels, and then the rows indicate the types of conditions, check-ins, etc., that pretrial services provides at each of those levels. So you can see that individuals released on level 1 monitoring, that is reminders only, so there's not active monitoring, but they will receive court date notifications by text, phone, or email. Levels 2, 3, and 4 do provide active monitoring with more frequent check-ins and contacts as those supervision levels increase. There are a couple of notes at the bottom of the table. If an individual is ordered to pretrial supervision and a PSA has not been completed, our department will start individual on level 2 supervision. And then second note, there will be some individuals whose PSA scores would translate into level 1 supervision, but because of a need for active monitoring, such as substance abuse monitoring or location monitoring, we will place them on level 2 supervision so that we can monitor those specific conditions.
Great, thank you. So next, now that we have a basic understanding of what a risk assessment tool is, what it's predicting, and specifically what the public safety assessment is, we are going to take a look at an example to look at a scenario and go through how it would be scored by each factor, and then what their outcome scores would be, and then what supervision level they would fall within. So our example here is we have a 24-year-old woman who's booked into custody for stolen property. She has no pending charges. She does have one prior misdemeanor conviction, as well as one prior felony conviction, but neither of her convictions are violent. She has one prior failure to appear in the past 2 years, as well as one prior failure to appear 4 years ago. And she has no prior sentences to jail or prison. So when we take each individual factor and answer these factors based upon that scenario, we can look at each pretrial outcome and how the raw scores are created. So under the FTA column, we know that she has no pending charge at time of arrest. And again, I think as we previously looked at, factor 3 pending is a predictive factor for all 3 of these outcomes. So because she does not have a pending charge, we can see that there is a no for FTA, NCA, and NVCA, which equates to 0 points. Under the FTA column, if we go down, we do know that she has prior convictions, and 5A, whether or not it's a prior felony or misdemeanor conviction, she gets a point towards FTA for just having a prior conviction. So that's yes, and she has 1 point. Whereas if we look under new criminal arrest and across for factor 4, prior misdemeanor conviction, as well as prior felony conviction, we can see that she has a yes for each of those for factor 4 and 5, and 1 point was allotted for each one of those convictions towards the new criminal arrest score. So we can work our way through this, and based upon her scoring of these 9 factors, for FTA, she has a total score of 4. For NCA, she has a total score, raw score of 3. And for the new violent criminal arrest, she has a raw score of 1, which is translated to a no. So here, oh, Carrie, do you mind going back? I'm sorry. Okay, so sorry, I just didn't make note of the score. So she was an FTA 4 and an NCA of 3, and then the no violent flag. So if we go to the next slide, what we can see here is, and Carrie went over this briefly when we went over the release conditions matrix, is if we take that scaled score of 1 to 6, so she was an FTA of 4, and if we go across the top for an NCA of 3, that lands us at a release level of 2. And then in looking specifically at our pretrial release level and what is included in that level, we can see a level 2 specifically means that pretrial would monitor any mandatory statutory conditions. This individual would receive court date notifications, whether that's by text, phone call, or email. This individual pretrial would conduct a once a month criminal history check. This individual would be required to report to pretrial once per month, whether that's in person or by phone. And then lastly, we would monitor any additional case-specific conditions that the court may order.
Okay, thank you. So we mentioned before that the public safety assessment is completed prior to the preliminary appearance. This provides a bit more detail. So the PSA is completed when an individual is 18 years or older and facing potential charges in the adult criminal legal system. PSA is completed on individuals booked at the Thurston County Jail, where cases are pending disposition and where they will appear before a judicial officer for pretrial release decision related to a new probable cause, a first appearance warrant, or a failure to appear predisposition warrant. There are some cases in which individuals may be on that preliminary appearance hearing calendar where a PSA will not be completed. Examples of that are shown at the bottom. That would include therapeutic court warrants, diversion program warrants, deferred prosecution warrants, extradition matters, post-conviction warrants, and if an individual is charged with an offense that allegedly occurred while in custody. As I mentioned, we did fully implement the public safety assessment at the beginning of October 2023. Along with that, we have implemented a new pretrial services screening report. In the past, pretrial services staff in our reports to the court did make a release recommendation. The new pretrial services screening report does not include a release recommendation. It really is focused on the PSA. It shows those individual factor scores, as well as the scaled scores, some of the data related to the likelihood of pretrial success, and the release level. The pretrial services screening report still does include background information such as other open cases and a full history of adult criminal convictions. Along with our implementation of the public safety assessment, We are conducting internal to our department ongoing quality assurance to assure the accuracy of scoring of the public safety assessment. And we are working on our ability to really review and report data to our partners on release decisions, pretrial outcomes, etc. Here is an example of that new pretrial screening report format. So again, there's some background information on the individual. This will show the charges that individual is facing. It will show the type of appearance. Is it a probable cause? Is it a warrant? The release level, that is that level based on the release conditions matrix. So if the judicial officer orders release and orders pretrial supervision, this report will show the level based on the PSA scores. Then the report moves in and shows those PSA scores, once again, for failure to appear, new criminal arrest, and new violent criminal arrest. And the pretrial services screening report shows the data as a reminder based on our local validation, how similarly situated individuals, their outcomes during the pretrial period. So again, based on a given scaled score, how likely is that particular type of individual to appear in court and to remain arrest-free. The new pretrial services screening report also shows the responses to the individual PSA factors, the 9 factors that we discussed, and again, still includes that background information on a full history of adult criminal convictions and other open cases. In closing, the PSA is a considerable shift for how pretrial services provides screening information, but it is just one piece of information. So the PSA is available to judicial officers. It is shared with the prosecuting attorney's office. It is shared with defense attorneys, and it is one piece of information that a judicial officer uses to make release decisions and to determine conditions of release. Lawyers for both the prosecution and defense can and do bring additional information about the specific circumstances of an individual, the specific allegations, specific history, and all of that, in addition to the public safety assessment, factor into those decisions made by judicial officers. Once again, the PSA is one piece of our overall pretrial justice system improvement efforts through our own local discussions and through the APPR project. There is ongoing work more broadly on other aspects of our pretrial justice system as well. Thank you for watching today, and we hope this has provided a good overview of the public safety assessment.